Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation on virtual exchange. This podcast series grows out of the forthcoming Handbook of Using Virtual Exchange Across Disciplines, Building Global Citizens from Home, which will be published by Springer in April 2026. The Handbook brings together educators from a wide range of disciplines who are thinking deeply about how virtual exchange is reshaping teaching, learning, and collaboration across borders. Sometimes this work unfolds smoothly, and at other times it is challenging, but it is often genuinely transformative. My name is Robert Steele. I'm a professor at DePaul University in Chicago, and I serve as the Arts Section Editor for the Handbook. One of the great pleasures of working on this project has been seeing how creative and critical disciplines have embraced virtual exchange not simply as a logistical solution, but as a space for reimagining pedagogy itself. This is especially evident in how educators are engaging questions of voice, power, care, and ethical responsibility. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Ilka Kressner and Jose Luis Jimenez-Figarotti, co-authors of the chapter Shared Screens, Fostering Care Through Documentary Filmmaking in Collaborative Online Learning. In this chapter, they explore how documentary filmmaking within virtual exchange environments becomes a powerful site of interdisciplinary learning, ethical negotiation, and intercultural citizenship. Their work shows how the screen can shift from a surface of separation to a shared space of meaning-making, particularly when collaboration unfolds across profound geopolitical and material asymmetries. So welcome, Ilka, and welcome, Jose Luis. Please introduce yourselves, your titles, and your university affiliations, and let's start with Ilka.
Yes, hello, everybody. Thank you, Rob, for this opportunity. My name is Ilka Kressner. I'm an associate professor of Spanish, and I'm also the chair of the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at the University at Albany, SUNY.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Luis Jimenez-Figarotti. I am associate researcher and co-coordinator at Andrés Bello Catholic University in Venezuela.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn to your chapter and to what virtual exchange made possible in your courses and collaboration. Based on your chapter, what impact did virtual exchange have on the subject matter of your courses?
Well, let me start. I think we could not have taught most of the subject matters of our 4 COIL collaborations without virtual exchange, because I'm teaching Latin American culture and film. And from my perspective, the exchange was fundamental to really for the live communication with others in Spanish mostly. So the linguistic part was important for me as well. And yeah, the contemporary cultural realities and how they are being shared. So I think it was fundamental for all the iterations and all the collaborations Jose Luis and I had so far from my side. Jose Luis, what do you think?
Yes, what I think the importance of virtual exchange collaboration between 2 nations, it was the comparative documentaries, the comparative studies of the subjects that we did in each of the iterations, which provide the students to find similarities and differences between the 2 realities and then deepen their knowledge on issues such as popular culture, environmental education, and how those issues are approached from the different cultures.
Wonderful. And let's go on to the next question, Ilka. What would have been missed in teaching your discipline if virtual exchange had not been included?
I think I want to mention 2 things, particularly. One is, again, related to language. It was central that my students engaged with Jose Luis's students in real time, synchronously, asynchronously, but mostly synchronously. So for a real kind of real-time communication and exchange. And that, of course, in the context of comparison of what culture means for someone, what is an autoethnography, if you have the kind of the oral, the voice, if you have the the real communication that is the most, I would say, the most fruitful part of the virtual exchange. And if that had not been included, I mean, this most important part would have missed. That is kind of from a communication part. And the other element is, I mean, one exchange was on popular culture, and one exchange was on finding one's voice, or also being, well, daring to speak one's voice. It was during the pandemic. And that was an immense opening for my students as a kind of a type of safe space for my students to share their experience of the pandemic with the students in Caracas. So I think those were, for me, the most fruitful elements that would have, well, missed if we hadn't had that virtual exchange.
Yes, in my case, and seeing it, and we are going to deepen this issue later in the next questions, but the reality that we face in Venezuela, and my students, like students who have been born under a dictatorship, and their lives, their visions have no optimism of the future, having to work with students from another country, in this case from the United States, it opened their minds, it opened their hope of life. Things are not as negative as they have faced in their childhoods, but there are other ways of living and other hopes. If we didn't have these collaborations, it would never have emerged in my classroom.
No, that's wonderful. And I have a couple of things that I want to offer. First and foremost, Ilka, you were mentioning synchronous conversations. When I started doing virtual exchanges over 10 years ago, we had very few synchronous conversations simply because of the class schedules and so on. And what I've learned is that they're absolutely necessary. And so now I work really hard to make sure that they're scheduled so we at least have some crossover, because those live conversations that we can actually help shape are, I think, fundamental to a great virtual exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I think that's terrific. Jose Luis, in terms of the world that you live in, the world that we live in is not much different nowadays, to be perfectly honest with you. But I have to say that one of my virtual exchanges is with a university in Brazil. Having dealt with Brazil for a long time, they've been through many governments, right wing, left wing, lots of protests and stuff like that. And my collaborator in Brazil is emailing me nowadays saying, now you know what it feels like. But let's go ahead and move on to conversations about the chapter, which is fabulous, by the way. I want to congratulate both of you on a beautifully written chapter. And you described the idea of shared screen as more than simply a technological interface. At what point did you realize the screen itself had become a central pedagogical space? And let's start with Ilka.
Yeah, I mean, the shared screen is a pun on split screen, obviously. But I think when did I realize that it's more than a kind of a technical tool? I believe when we had one kind of icebreaker where students would speak with each other without us, and then just tell us in our classes individually what it was about. And that was after I had introduced the collaboration. And after that very first interaction with Jose Luis' students in all 4 classes, well, my students changed. My students felt, okay, this is I can relate to this group of students, although I had never spoken with them, although they really live in a different context. They have the same problems I have. They face fears that I might also have. So I think after their first connection and their first meeting without us, there was an absolutely different, the collaboration was there. And once I virtually visited Jose Luis's class once, and he also visited my class, that was another type of communication. But I think it is from the beginning. Once they engage and exchange and are among themselves, we can offer them different types of communications with different, but kind of the groups always, but sometimes with us, sometimes without us. That definitely helps build their community connection and the shared focus on, we have a final project and it's this documentary, and let's work on it from our different kind of knowledges.
Well, the screen, it is a self-reflexive exercise, because through the whole process, we always were being mediated by the screen. In the different chats that we will do, the different presentations using Zoom as the medium, always the screen was present with us, and it was the exercise of learning. But one of the first moments that was very powerful, it was when Ilka was going to do the presentation for us. And in that precise day, there was no internet at the university. The elevator was not working. We had to figure out how we were going to contact Ilka, because Ilka was waiting on the other side, and we decided to use Facebook Live, and I used my cell phone with data, and finally Ilka appears in the screen, and it was in a big room. There was a big screen, and there was there Ilka's face, and the emotion of my students by seeing Ilka in the screen. It was what really turned me into think of the power of the screen for this collaboration.
That's amazing. I'm deeply moved by that. I can picture your students now. And so, speaking of asymmetries, can we talk about your chapter, which discusses asymmetries of infrastructure, time, political freedom, material conditions? How did these shape the student collaborations, and how did you help students engage them productively?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a bit of context. I teach at a very large public university, and in my classes, maybe 1/3 of my students are English native speakers who have learned Spanish, 1/3 are Spanish native speakers, and 1/3 are Latinx students, so with some kind of a heritage knowledge of Spanish. So, and I have also several students, for instance, from Cuba. There was some familiarity with Latin America, kind of family connections by many of them. I believe my students work. Some even work full time. So it's not kind of it's a public university where I teach. And so it was interesting to hear from my students that Jose Luis's students were surprised that my students had to work, and so now someone cannot join the group because they are working for Amazon or something like that. And so I think that was kind of the economic part, definitely asymmetries. And another element was the time commitment, because sometimes my students were kind of, when we meet at that time and we should start on time, and maybe sometimes not all students were there, and my students took that personally and kind of, they didn't come or not all of them were there, and there was one student who I've never seen them. So and then I explained a little bit, well, this is really a different reality they are facing, and it might be just not possible for them to connect right now to internet. So we read also a little bit, and I did that starting the second iteration, so a bit of kind of internet connection in Venezuela at that moment, so that my students, it's kind of that they didn't take it personally and didn't think, they are just, slackers, they don't want to collaborate, but that there might be other reasons. I guess that those are some elements I would mention.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about virtual exchanges is how much it engenders empathy and understanding. Right. And I think that's life-changing. And we used to say before virtual exchange, if you really want to change your perspective on the world, you have to go travel the world. And now we have this, and it's amazing for the students that can't travel, which is wonderful. And so let's talk to Jose Luis, let's talk to you about these asymmetries. So how did you help your students engage with them productively?
Yes, it's since the beginning of our collaboration, the asymmetries were present, and the strong the challenges that we have to face, even when we first were supposed to meet with Ilka. I was supposed to travel to Mexico and meet there, and my passport was blocked, and I was not able to travel to meet Ilka. So from the beginning, we had all kinds of obstacles, and we had constantly to be creative and to find ways to solve those obstacles. But in terms of infrastructure, as I mentioned, we have power outages that can block the communications, the internet connection, the political issues, and even in the case that Ilka was mentioning, the frustration of time. For the United States, because I lived 20 years in the United States, you can plan something 6 months ahead, and that day comes and you have the event that you have planned. Here it is impossible. You cannot plan from now to 2 hours later. So it was frustrating from American students from their point of view because they take for granted the time. For us, like, for example, I can be talking to you right now, or a student can be talking to their partner, and the water comes, and they have to rush to fill buckets of water because maybe that's the only time in the week that they have available water to eat, to take a shower. So those are the asymmetries that we mentioned. It made even harder the collaborations. However, it's harder, but not impossible. We always find a way to solve those asymmetries.
I'm thinking about how beautifully documentary lives within virtual exchange. We're starting to see a lot of documentary filmmaking coming out of these collaborations, but documentary filmmaking raises inherent questions about embodiment, voice, and ethics. How did working in a virtual environment complicate or deepen your students' awareness of representation and responsibility? And we'll start with Ilka.
I mean, students are familiar with a certain type of short videos. I mean, for instance, TikTok, there's this kind of the self-representation. But if you are engaged in a conversation, there's no, you don't have this 30 seconds. It continues. The engagement is maybe more honest, a bit raw sometimes as well. But there was this deep excitement of students that showed during meetings, showed each other, I don't know, parts of their room, and that was something that would post something on Facebook. And that was something that the Venezuelan students did more than mine. And mine said, "Oh, I'm not sure. Should that be posted? And I don't want to be on Facebook." So I had to convince them. Well, Facebook is really it helps us to be connected. And then we used Padlet after a while, but in the beginning it was Facebook. And my students were resistant to that, and I always had to ask, "Can I take a picture? Is it okay with you?" That was something that was not a problem at all for the Venezuelan students. My students were much more considerate about that. Yeah, and the responsibility that what I think that started when we really had the final project and when students started to write the scripts together. I saw, for instance, more questions on, is it possible to, can I record you, and or can this is now a part of a longer recording, and we edited out some passages or something. So this awareness, I would say, would grow with the length of the project and with the collaboration. And once the writing became part, the script writing became part of it, that changed the quality of the documentaries.
Well, I think it deepened it in many, many ways. I mean, I always say that virtual exchange is a multi-dimensional experience, and it is difficult, like, to trace all the dimensions that have been engaged with the students. But in terms of embodiment, voice, and ethics, the growth of the students in both parts was very, very deep because of the situations that were raising while they were discussing on the production of the documentaries. For instance, in 3 instances, for example, there was a case in the first collaboration that a student was supportive of the dictatorship in Venezuela, and it was anti-American. And the discussions that raised while they were deciding what type of documentary they were going to do on popular culture, it was a huge reflection, not only for the students, but for Ilka and I, that we have to talk and see how we were going to be handling that situation. In another instance, also in terms of embodiment, voice, and ethics, a multicultural team was deciding if working with suicide for their documentary. And that raised a discussion, a deep discussion on ethics and how to touch that topic, because some students were sensitive to the topic. It would raise emotions. And then Ilka and I had to discuss the situation and find the solution of not doing the documentary on that subject matter. And another instance was talking about symbols of freedom and how students here under a dictatorship felt that they were not free. However, in the United States group, a Hispanic student in front of the Statue of Liberty felt that he was not free in the United States. So those issues raise deep, deep, deep reflections on embodiment, voice, and ethics.
Thank you so much. And I can hear in your voices, and I read it in the chapter, the concept of care. It's an important concept in your chapter. And I want to know, how did care manifest in concrete ways within student interactions and within your collaboration with each other?
First, empathy was important. Now, care is for us the key concept. The continued engagement, the kind of deep listening. That's what I have to learn each time. This is a process. When, for instance, students, there was a bit of the reluctance. Why do we work with socialist students? And and then I said that we were not working with socialist students. We worked with students of your age, and that faced the same situation. That was something where I all of a sudden had to discuss or touch different topics than the ones that I would usually discuss in classes. I think that, the questions of students, sometimes students surprise you. You know, some students, and they are really maybe insecure and quiet in some context, and all of a sudden in the COIL collaboration, they are the ones that are the group leaders and are the most describing what care means for them and in a multicultural context. So students grow a lot, and you see them. And maybe within our faculty collaboration, what Jose Luis mentioned, we had a lot of communication alongside our class communications and little discussions what to do with that. But yeah, I think we have developed a friendship. I would say we have never had a cup of coffee together. We hopefully will have a cup of coffee at some point, but we have written 3 research papers together and have had more and more COIL collaborations, and there will be more. So I guess there is a lot to say about care within a virtual context for someone and the continued collaboration with them.
What is interesting is the long term of all our collaboration, because it's almost 8 years of collaborating together. So there were historically 3 very marked periods of our collaboration. Pre-pandemia, pre-COVID-19, we started with that situation. We were coming out of a very hard situation in Venezuela. There was a lot of hunger on people. There was no food, and the power was really bad. So in that first collaboration, care was fundamental. Care for the Venezuelan students, care for the self, and then the care that Ilka provided to me, and the care that Ilka and her students provided to us. So again, this is multi-dimensional. So that was the first stage, historical stage. Then it comes the COVID-19 pandemic, and there is another set of care. because of the situation that American students were facing. Ilka told me that she didn't have that many students registered because of the trauma of all that was happening there. So she had a small group, and I said, fine, I get a small group too, and we will work together. But we had to provide care to everybody because it was something new globally on terms of health and fear. So we had to collaborate with a lot of care. And then post pandemic, like students also, I mean, after the pandemic, the COVID-19, students came out of focus. It was really, really difficult to work with them because they had spent so much time online and their concentration was very, very light. So that was another set of care, another way of providing care for everybody. So it's fundamental that during our collaborations, care has been fundamental.
It's interesting. We refer often back to the pandemic and how we all had to quickly pivot onto computers and screens and Zoom. And for some of it, it was very difficult if you're teaching film production, which I do. And some people were dealing with emotional traumas. Inherently in virtual exchanges, it's a minefield. Some things go wrong. Some students have a really hard time with it. And I want you to talk about this because you write so candidly about moments of tension and silence and discomfort. And I want to know, how did you decide when to step in as instructors and when to allow those moments to remain part of the learning process?
I sometimes want to step in earlier. And so I had to teach myself to also wait a little longer. Sometimes students would approach me individually and I would say, try to discuss that with your group. And I come and discuss with your group. I think it's kind of listening to the students, trying to have them figure out tensions. And in most cases they did, and they resolved them, and they were then really proud because they were responsible for this. They took this opportunity as something as well, an opportunity to resolve the tension. So whenever students among themselves can, or the groups among themselves can do it, all the better. In some cases, we stepped in, and it was never only me or only Jose Luis. It was always that we had spoken before with each other. And for instance, then would say, well, those four group members from this one group and the two from the other, you are now a bit more in charge, and we help you with that portion of the work, and then we continue maybe when there was a kind of a bottleneck moment. Being earnest and listening, sometimes silences say a lot as well. Encourage students that discomfort is painful, but we have a lot of power to really overcome it. And so giving them also a bit of much energy so that they can have agency to overcome. And of course, if they say, no, really, we need your help, then we have to be there, and as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line because I teach film production, which means that they're going to be collaborating for the rest of their lives. And sometimes it's going to be ugly and difficult and challenging and not comfortable at all. And I need my students to experience that, to learn how to create safety zones, to learn how to push through it, to learn how to not let that break them down, but how to push through, how to get it done, and understand that this is part of the game. And so for me, I very often, when it gets tough, I say to them, this is going to get tough, and that's okay. And when you get to a point where you can't handle this anymore, let me know. But I want you to experience this because this won't be the last time you experience it. And that's the beauty of virtual exchange, is it allows us to build these parameters. And Jose Luis, how about you in terms of moments of tension and silence and discomfort? How do you decide when to step in, and how do you decide when to keep those part of the learning process?
As I have mentioned previously, moments of tension, silence, and discomfort have been from the very beginning of trying to meet Ilka, because again, we were supposed to meet in Mexico, and that was impossible. So those moments of tension, silence, and discomfort started from the beginning. But I think the the human aspect, and I appreciate Ilka's personality on finding bridges for those moments from the beginning. But that was already preparing us for the work with the students. And as I mentioned previously too, those moments of tension, of different points of view, different ideologies, in this case political views, were moments of tension, and how from both parts, but I think from the United States part, the students were very, very mature on dealing with those moments of tension, and they handled it very, very well. However, I mean, Ilka and I were talking about those things and how we were going to intervene in those times. And in terms of the silence, it was more from infrastructural problems, those silences, and trying to solve those silences through conversation, and trying to explain the students how to deal with those moments.
Discomfort is part of making anything. It's a process. When I teach my classes, one of the very first things I say in every single class is I celebrate failure. I celebrate experimentation. I celebrate risk. Nothing bad comes out of it. And I say, please don't be cautious, because nothing interesting comes out of caution. And so I want to ask you about your students. And did you observe your students taking intellectual or personal risks that stood out to you? Do you remember any examples of that? And we'll start with Ilka.
Yes, I remember one our to date final the most recent collaboration that was on environmental NGOs. I had given my students a list of smaller NGOs in the Albany region. And I told them, reach out to those people, visit that NGO, try to interview someone working there so that you have material, because you will have to work on a joint documentary with Jose Luis's students. And so that was for students, they were kind of in groups of 5 or 6, and they had to interview someone in, English, but then translate it into Spanish. So they were very tentative. And then they said, oh, we don't have good NGOs. Venezuela has the best parks, tropical forests, and what can we do here in Albany? And so I think the kind of finding worth or finding significance in their own context, in their own emplacement, and then really developing, for instance, questions for interview questions, and then they would film themselves. In one was at the Albany Arboretum, for instance. So this is kind of speaking with the owner of the Arboretum, which was very nice. This owner also then afterward congratulated the university for this beautiful video that students had done, and then the university afterward found out that it had been my students. So I think this speaking up, finding a place, engaging with people as a group, and then of course translating it into Spanish, that took a while, and it made my students so proud. I think that is one instance I want to share.
Yes, in the case of both groups of students, the intellectual and personal risk, it was in the choice of the documentaries. Like, for instance, the one about suicide, it was intellectual and personal risk to touch such a taboo topic to collaborate. So they were taking those risks, at least proposing those subjects were taking those risks. And then the one with the symbols of freedom, that was also a big risk, because they were talking about what freedom means for them. For example, the Venezuelan students, they recorded in a square or a plaza where people have been killed for protesting. So, I mean, that was touching those aspects of freedom under a dictatorship. It intellectual and personal risk. And even the Hispanic student in New York going to the Statue of Liberty and talking about how does he feel about liberty being a Hispanic in the United States is a huge risk, personal and intellectual.
So you've been working together for 8 years. Looking across the different iterations of this collaboration, how did your own understanding of virtual exchange evolve? What changed in the way you think about teaching, partnership, or global citizenship?
Teaching, maybe I would say less is more. When I look at some of our syllabi at the very beginning, they were too crammed, and it's very important to give students space to figure out things among themselves, to complement each other's knowledges, each other's. We have students, learners from different disciplines suddenly collaborating with each other. So a very, very careful choice of assignments where they really need each other to accomplish those assignments. And I think that was something I certainly learned from the kind of teaching part, to craft those assignments with those different knowledges and disciplines in mind, and that they need each other. Absolutely. Partnership, I don't know, the partnership has grown without, I didn't think I could develop a friendship only virtually, and we are doing this. So I'm very grateful to José Luis for this. Global citizenship, I believe this is one of the main reasons why I will continue working in a virtual exchange context, because if I really want to take internationalization seriously, and particularly with students who might not be able to study abroad, for instance, this is one of the best ways to develop global citizenship among my learners. So it's a very, very powerful a very powerful way. But in addition to practicing technology and also to helping students to overcome their fear of speaking a different language. So those were definitely super immense benefits to engage in global to broaden the global citizenship element.
In terms of what have changed since we started doing virtual exchange in Venezuela, there was not virtual exchange. We did the first pilot, and then I saw the huge potential of doing virtual exchange in Venezuela, and I started advocating to the authorities of my university to create a program, and I became the coordinator, to the point today that we already have done 250 COIL collaborations with all the disciplines at the university. We have worked with 21 countries, and we have engaged around 7,000 students at the university. So it has been a huge change in my life, in my way of doing teaching, and teaching other faculty to do virtual exchange. And in terms of global citizenship, it is important because we're basing all the collaborations on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are putting students to work on solutions of global issues like climate change and social injustice. So in terms of global citizenship, students are being engaged in advocating to find solutions for the whole planet.
Ilka and Jose Luis, thank you both for this conversation and for the extraordinary work you share in Shared Screens. Your chapter offers a powerful reminder that virtual exchange is not only about access or connectivity, but about care, responsibility, and the courage to listen across difference. The depth of thought, ethical clarity, and generosity that shape your collaboration make this contribution truly stand out. Thank you for your commitment to your students, to each other, and to the larger project of building global citizens from home. It has been a pleasure to speak with you and an honor to include your work in the Handbook. And thanks to everyone listening for joining us in this conversation on virtual exchange. Again, Ilka and Jose Luis, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.